Hello and welcome to Blockchain Bylines. My name's Nicholas Cary, co-founder and vice chairman of blockchain.com. For this month's Bylines episode, we're excited to host Sarah Olsen, managing partner of Europa Digital Assets, also known as Europa Partners. Europa Partners is an alternative investment fund deploying market neutral relative value in derivative strategies across global cryptocurrency markets. Primary trading strategies include arbitrage trading, systemic trading, volatility trading, as well as event-driven opportunities across the sector. I'm sure Sarah can add a lot of color to this. So without further ado, let's jump into this month's byline. So a lot of people won't know this, but Sarah and I go way back and I've been watching her career with so much interest over the former decades. But I wanted to hear from your perspective. Tell us a little bit about your story. You started off in TradFi, you ended up in crypto. How did you get into all this in the first place? And tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So, Nick, others may not know. We grew up in Colorado. We went to a very small high school. And when I say like that there were, 300 people in our entire high school. So we've known each other now for about 25 years. After college, I moved to New York in 2009. So it's an interesting time to be starting your career in financial services. I worked for an asset management firm called Rockefeller Financial, which was the original family office of the Rockefeller family. It was about a $30 billion firm managing money for other people at the time. And my job there was allocating to alternative funds, hedge funds, private equity funds. We looked at some direct deals. And mostly what we were doing during that time was looking for either distressed investments, just given sort of the credit crisis, and also sort of non-correlative assets. It was a really nice job right out of school because I got to look at a lot of different fund structures, a lot of different investment strategies. We were looking at opportunities up and down the capital structure. And then from there, I worked for a middle market private equity fund, really a middle market debt fund, again, lending to small businesses. And after that, I worked for a larger private equity fund, Apollo, where I worked on their life settlements team. I felt really privileged to have those jobs. They're definitely, the subject matter is really interesting, but it was not, nothing was particularly inspiring. And you had introduced me to Bitcoin in like, when did you start blockchain.com? Like 2012, 2011?
Yep.
Um, so I'm here having working in these like very, very traditional old school firms. And you're telling me about this like really interesting new technology that exists completely outside of everything that I'm doing. I didn't know a ton about the technology at the time, but I was like, Nick, hire me. Like, I'll come work for you. And I think you were like, Sarah, we're 8 dudes sharing an apartment in York or something at the time. It was just such a different time. But what happened was when I was at Apollo, I ended up being reached out to a recruiter who was like, would you be interested in interviewing for a Bitcoin company? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I didn't know much about it. And then my first, go into interview, and my interview is with Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss at the same time. And this was in 2016. And they had just received their banking license from the state of New York and looking to build out an institutional platform to service asset managers, prop shops, more institutional players than we'd sort of seen thus far in crypto. That was kind of my pivot into crypto. But it was really your introduction to Bitcoin and talking about what you did that was just kind of like so inspiring and why I wanted to get in the space.
Well, you went right into the deep end with the Winklevi twins, which is an amazing story. So, a lot of our listeners might not know that you hold degrees in philosophy from Georgetown University. And despite having an extensive career in financial services and then heading into crypto, I think there are a lot of interesting philosophical undertones and concepts in the digital asset space and finance in general. I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on how these two things sort of have interacted and what your personal sort of perspective is on why responsibly handling people's money and access to markets is so important and what role crypto really plays in terms of competing and also offering an alternative to so many other financial services offerings.
This question's interesting because I actually get this a lot, when people peruse to like the back, if they make it to the back of like our marketing deck, for example. It's a question I get fairly often. And I don't think like studying philosophy and, having a more examined life leads somebody to the crypto sector. I think there's probably, if you're really leading an examined life, you're probably doing something else. But, I'd say that what's been really nice about having training in philosophy, and I really do mean like training in philosophy, not sort of studying something else, reading, one Nietzsche book and then claiming to be a philosopher. Has been nice because it gives you a way of kind of thoughtfully and methodically approaching how to test the status quo. Why are things the way they are? Do they need to be changed? Can they be changed? What's the best way to do that with integrity? Both with respect to sort of the individual and then kind of the collective as a whole. I think that like working in our industry is given sort of a nice sort of intellectual playing space in that way to sort of say like, hey, is this, people say things like, is this a feature or is this a bug? Is this something that really needs to be changed, or can we, improve upon it a little bit with better technology? Or is this a system that's fundamentally broken and can we create something better? What did you study at college?
Yeah, so I studied international political economics, which was an IPE major, and then I have a degree in business and emphasis leadership studies. I had all the credits for politics and government degree with an emphasis constitutional law. But that intersection between politics, economics, and like a personal passion for technology was sort of what like the hurricane of things that came together that made me extremely curious about an alternative financial system, one that would use the internet and be grounded in principles of open access, better, cheaper, faster. And I think that point you made about testing the status quo, challenging assumptions with integrity is really foundational, especially to the earliest stages of crypto's development, coming out of the great financial crisis and then sort of reasoning our way through technology and implementations to sort of deliver on something that would hopefully be better for everybody. And I think we made extraordinary strides over the former decade, but there's still a lot of room to grow. And in a lot of ways, we're sort of at the early stages of traveling through that early adopter phase into something a little bit more mainstream. And I'd love to actually talk with you a bit about that, because you've sort of been at that intersection, not necessarily at the full institutional level that some of the firms are talking about getting to, but offering something that is available today. And so let's talk a bit about Europa Partners. Who's your audience? Who's your customer? Tell us a bit about who you're serving and what are popular products or services you guys offer.
Sure. I co-run a fund with a guy named Pete Wisniewski. Pete used to be the head of global trading for Galaxy. He was one of their earliest employees. He and I manage capital on behalf of ourselves. We run our own money. We're the largest investor in our own fund. We also manage money on behalf of Galaxy, which has been a great supporter of our business. And then probably 12 to 15 other qualified purchasers, which is kind of a, fancy legal way of saying kind of ultra high net worth individuals. Most of our investor base, we have a couple of folks that have generated their wealth through crypto, but most of our investors are professional traders. They've made money in the traditional markets, and they're not crazy sort of crypto bulls, which is also not what we do. We don't take like big directional bets on the price of crypto. They're people that really understand markets, and when you have newer markets, kind of how fragmented and hairy they can be, and how that leads to tremendous opportunity across, again, strategies like what we do, pure play arbitrage, relative value, and then deploying other derivative strategies across the market. Despite the fact that we are not sort of traditional customer facing business, because we're a small asset management firm, what's really cool about what we do is we can trade the entire space. So what we're looking to do is find dislocations across everything that's linked to crypto. We trade spot, we trade derivatives, whether those be linear derivatives like futures or swaps, nonlinear derivatives like options. We trade ETFs, we trade single name equities, we trade convertible debt. I mean, we can really trade the entire market landscape. And that's been really interesting because everything is just a little bit different, right? In terms of where you trade, how you trade, risk considerations. I always describe it saying in my job, it's a lot of fun problems, a lot of really interesting problems to sort through.
I think that's definitely true. Crypto is never boring. Let's talk a little bit about how you see yourself in the market and who are you competing with, or how are you different from some of the other trading firms in crypto?
I think that we've seen some actively managed buy side firms, but really the folks that are deploying active strategies have been the large proprietary trading firms, mostly because they typically have fewer restrictions. If you're not managing third party capital, they're also deploying strategies across the global markets. So really the markets right now are driven by the large trading shops out of Chicago, downtown New York. I'm sure some customers of yours that are really doing the large volumes. With respect to other sort of buy side, actively managed firms, I kind of joke if you see one crypto hedge fund, you've seen sort of one crypto hedge fund. I'd say what's a little bit different about us is the majority of what we do is not actually touching sort of the spot crypto market. So most of our portfolio is typically in centrally cleared futures, equities, cash. We do trade spot crypto or what I call sort of crypto native derivatives. You can think of those like perpetual swaps, for example, or options on marketplaces like Deribit. But typically, if we can execute something centrally in the US using kind of traditional counterparties, that's how we're going to do it.
Got it. So we're into 2025. It's just been a few weeks. There's a new administration in Washington, D.C., and it's put crypto really on the American agenda. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you've seen and what your clients are sort of seeing? And are you guys optimistic about this year? Talk to us a little bit about what the sentiment is across the desk.
I would say a lot more people want to talk to us now than they did last year or the year before. So, we're feeling a little bit more popular, I guess. But I think one thing, and, I'd really like to get your opinion as well, because you've been through another cycle or two sort of before I have. I think I'm really excited to be in an environment where it feels like people and institutions are more pro-crypto than they have been. But one thing that I try to also manage as well is everybody thinks that the cycle they're in is like sort of the first cycle, right? And we go through these sort of hype cycles and sort of down cycles where crypto is in favor, out of favor. I try to stay sort of even keeled kind of throughout that. I think what we're hoping for in 2025 and really having this be like a prolonged, sustained period of crypto interest, what we're really hoping for is improved market structure. So that's everything from having bigger banks support crypto businesses, not just a fund like ours, but for firms like blockchain.com to have better fiat rails, more regulated products in the United States, whether those are ETFs that are holding other types of cryptocurrencies, more options on ETFs, having a better lendable ETF market, which is imperative for sort of the health of the space. So we're really hopeful that this time is going to bring a lot more kind of regulated tradable products to the market. I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think anyone that's been in this space for more than 6 weeks has to have some reservation about the volatility in the market itself. Crypto is famously very volatile, but I think a lot of the points you made are things that I'm, encouraged by. The market's gotten more mature. And I think if you're try to compare it to like human development, we're probably coming out of our teenage years and entering early adulthood.
Your words to God's ears.
Well, think it's about time. But like you said, getting these better financial rails, having legal and regulatory clarity around some of the concepts in crypto, whether it's stable coins, staking, even treatment around tax would be welcome, especially for some clarity on that for US consumers and institutions alike. But probably more competition basically happening will broadly be good for the industry, and especially for the older participants that have been around a long time seeking these things. I think they'll be able to lean into their reputations as stable firms that have weathered difficult storms, and having more market stability will be beneficial to companies that have been operating for a while. So we're quite encouraged by all those things. And I think the profile of it being raised so hugely in Washington, D.C. will signal to the rest of the world that this is a big priority for the largest, most powerful economy in the world. And others will start to follow and develop their own strategies, whether that's in the UK or Europe, to compete. And I'm encouraged by those things, especially on the banking side. Now it's going to be possible for US financial institutions to custody crypto. That really wasn't an option for them in the past. And now they've got a pathway to doing so. So we're going to see, I think, a lot of development. And at the same time, it's going to take a lot of diligence from the operators in the space to continue to deliver for their clients. So I'd be interested to hear, well, what are you guys excited about through the rest of the year? And maybe give us a little bit of a looking down into the horizon, that, what your forecast is.
I think for us, we're excited to do a lot of what we have been doing, potentially in bigger size. I think that we, again, have been really good at continuing to build through a down cycle. So we're really proud of the infrastructure that we built. And despite being a smaller fund, we have really good operational hygiene, which is really important for any asset manager. But I think particularly for anyone who's managing third-party capital in our space, because it's already complicated enough, you definitely don't want to be not hitting the other marks with what's required when you're managing capital. We're excited for more opportunities in the convertible debt space. I think we're excited for just more issuance in the US market, more excited for more tradable products. I think that from a trading perspective, I think there's going to be a lot to do. I think from a kind of institutional allocation perspective, and honestly, I think that you're obviously very close to somebody who has a deep expertise in the alternative space. I'd be curious what she thinks, but I think it's going to still take some time for institutional allocators to be able to really kind of underwrite our space to be able to thoughtfully deploy capital. And so what we've seen so far is a lot of capital going into venture capital funds, because that's something from a due diligence standpoint, it looks pretty similar to other things that investors invest in, right? Where if you're doing operational due diligence on a crypto fund, there's, significant considerations that are different than if you're doing that on like a long short equity fund or a traditional event driven fund. So I think that although I'm really, every year is like the institutional year for crypto, every year that I've worked in this space, I'm really hoping within the next few years, we're going to start to see sort of large allocators starting to participate in the space and size.
Yep, I think that all makes a ton of sense. So we'll be watching for those developments as well. So check out europapartners.xyz to keep up with the firm and Sarah's incredible work with her team there. We're extremely grateful for your time today and your insights. Thank you for sharing them. Please remember to subscribe to our channel and leave a review if you enjoyed today's episode. I'm Nick Cary on behalf of the entire blockchain.com team. Thank you very much for tuning in.